Strike the knife and lick the knife.
Did you see the Death Star? Did you see the
Yeah.
And all of them just, everything, like no one would take someone's picture and leave it alone.
I gotta show you, there's a guy there who has a Blood Eagle tattoo, like this big across his nose. Really? Just a huge black and red Blood Eagle tattoo.
And that's sad. Who is that?
Said instantly. It looks like a.
He's here. He's like nothing, skinny little kid, like this tall.
He's doing cartoons.
He does anime.
Cartoons for Travel War.
He's out the window.
The average person attending here, I would be
He likes to check the television out the window while we're here.
And
Okay.
it's kind of
Anyway, guys, I'm sure I can do it.
15 to
Taking a picture.
Consensus that I'm in the photo. Doesn't want to just.
Yes, come on in.
want to damage itself.
There it is.
That's what I forgot to take a picture of.
Hi there.
Can you do all the
Richard.
pictures?
So if you guys don't know, WSBN very, very strongly expected, and by the time it came out, it was plagued with some technology problems, and the fans didn't react to it quite the way that we had hoped that they would. And Sierra, at the time that this was happening, made a very, very strong commitment to Tribes as a franchise. And they said, we are going to set this right, we're going to take this and do it over and do it the right way. So in the process of that, that meant first fixing Tribes 2. And that was quite a laborious process that we eventually completed last year. And finally the community very much responded to it. We made some significant changes to the game. We fixed a lot of bugs. And working very closely with the community, we got some really terrific extra content from some of the scripters and modders in the community. They remade Tribes 1 for us and Tribes 2. They created a number of different mods, created a new game type called Team Rabbit. And they finally believed us that really we were investing in the franchise. And at the same time, we were pursuing our plans for a new Tribes game. And we didn't want to make simply a remake of Tribes 1. We didn't want to go back to the well and come out with yet another multiplayer-only game that was very much only for the hardcore. We wanted a game that was going to be the next Half-Life. We wanted something that was going to grab every single gamer and explain to them in excruciating detail just how cool this universe is. And so one of the first things that Chris and I discovered was that Tribes as a game is not only complex, but very deep. And nice of you to show up, Tal.
Thank you. Adam said anytime.
Yeah, you know,
Blame him.
Sure.
Blame him.
Just have a seat. No, have a beer, then have a
I
seat.
will. I'm teaming away in the top beer.
Get that in order right.
Yeah. So one of the things that we realized, if we wanted to seriously compete with a brand like Half-Life, and we explicitly told our company that, yeah, we were going to compete with Half-Life, was that we needed to be able to explain the depth and scope of the game to more people. Because right now what happens is the game is 5 years old, and there are people who have been playing this game 5 years every single day of their lives. And some of them quite competitively, some of them on a level that you would never believe if I described it.
Right here. 5 years, every day.
Yeah. And they have advanced the game to such a level that if you decided to pick up a copy off the shelf and you go online, you would get your ass whipped so fast you would not have any fun at all. And that's a limitation of the product. So we said what we need to do is give people a much more gradual way in, because what we didn't want to do was dumb the game down. We wanted to keep the complexity. I mean, something that keeps people playing for 5 years in computer games, that's special. We wanted to keep that, but what we wanted to do was give people a very gradual step ladder for getting into that. And what Chris and I, after many, many walks around the block of Sierra, decided was that we needed a single-player campaign that was going to expose people to not only all the skills that you would need before going online, but also a little bit to the concept of what Tribes multiplayer might be. And as we decided that, we said, but what we don't want to do is just create a multiplayer game with another throwaway single-player campaign that was going to, you know, go find a key card, open the blue door, and get to the next thing. We said we're both grown-ups, and we've been playing games for a very long time. We're both married, and And we both have wives who play games, and their tastes are very different from ours. And we said, how do we get a game that would even reach them? We don't want to abandon us, we want a game for us. But we don't want to exclude them.
So Red Doors?
Did you get a beer? Drink more, speak less.
You're single, right, Tom?
No.
So we said, we've been gaming for an awful long time. We are really sick to death of having to save princesses held in castles guarded by dragons. We're really sick to death of ultimate evil that threatens the existence of the very universe. We're really just a little more grown up than that, and we're ready to create a game for an audience that is at least that mature. And you know, I make the distinction between age and maturity freely. So we said, okay, how do you tell a great story in a computer game? And what we decided was, you know, we're both avid readers, we like movies, and you watch movies, you read a book, and they're not told in the same way that you play a computer game. A computer game, for the most part, especially first-person shooters these days, play like pen and paper Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. You roll up a character, you create a character that's you, and then you are that character 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you see and know everything that happens only to that character. And we said, that's not how stories are told. When you watch Star Wars, yeah, it's great when you're watching Luke and you're emoting with him, you're understanding his side, but then you see Han Solo, and that's a very different character, and that's an important part to understand and be involved with. You see Darth Vader. Darth Vader doesn't have it easy being the plastic villain. He's got underlings that are coming up against him and that are trying to take over his position. That gives the story depth. And we said, well, why can't we make a game that tells a story that way? And using examples like Star Wars, using examples like Pulp Fiction, we said, what if you had a game where you played multiple characters? Where the game was told in the same way that a story rolls out on the TV or in the movies or in a book, where you have a scene that stars one character and then you move on to another scene that stars a different character. You move on to another scene that stars yet another character. And then you come back to the main character, and now you understand them so much better for having seen them through somebody else's eyes. And we said, we're grown-ups. We're ready to do this. So we set out a net and we started talking to game developers, and I hate to tell you, but they don't get it. They gave us all sorts of design docs that had lots of vehicles and multiple balancing tribes, but they didn't get the story part until we talked to Irrational. And Irrational, with a history of people who worked on Thief, Thief 2, System Shock 2, Freedom Force, most compelling story games, oh, they got it. And once we gave them that premise, that we wanted a game that is for grown-ups, that is a mature story that will leave you, that you will walk out of and feel the same thing that you've walked out of a good movie. You're thinking about it. Well, what if that? And what is that? What's the implication of that? Holy crap, is that really what that means? That's what we want to give gamers. And that kind of single-player campaign is going to teach you all the tribe skills that you need to know before you go online. As a matter of fact, we even took it a step farther and said the multiplayer aspect of tribes, especially the competitive community, is nothing but sport. They have, as I've explained, they have shoutcasters. They have Tribes 2 TV, which allows you, if you have the game, to watch another match in real time and hear somebody else's comment on it like a baseball game or a football game. They're very, very serious, and by the time you finish the single-player campaign, you will understand what that multiplayer concept is like, because it's very different from the story fiction of Tribes. Because within the story, we incorporate the concept of Tribes sport. In the universe that you're playing in single player, you will play in something that very much resembles what happens when you go online. And so by the time you finish the single-player campaign, you are going to be ready, and you're going to understand what it is to play Tribes. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and he's going to show you a current build, 35% complete. And what this build shows off, which is most important for Tribes, is fluidity and motion. Because every other shooter is about shooting. You know, they walk, run, crouch, bunny hop, circle, strafe. And then you have 10 guns and you hit fire. Tribes, before you ever fire a weapon, needs to be fun. And Tribes is about movement. And you'll see Chris, how he gets around a map, how he's able to cover tremendous distances, how he's able to maneuver. And all of that is a skill that is acquired on top of being able to shoot someone while doing all this.
Show us your neat skills.
So
My phone number.
Irrational Games chose Unreal as the engine to do this on because it was very much compatible with what they wanted to do, and it was something that they had experience with, and I think that it very much shows.
This is an early multiplayer map called Emerald. Parts of it look familiar, parts of it look sort of like what you might expect in Tribes map. Parts of it not quite so much. The rolling hills are familiar. The destroyed buildings not so much. So one of the new things that we've done here is when I walk up a hill, I can't really walk as fast as I can when I'm going down a hill. So just walking, not doing anything else, start to sort of jump and run down the hill. This makes sense. It's just one more thing that adds to the tribe's fluidity of movement, where it's hard to play and do the arm thing at the same time. Where in other games you're always running in other games, and if you're lucky you can switch to walk, and then the amazing movement part is you can jump, or you can maybe a rocket jump or something. Whereas in Tribes you have infinite variety of speeds that you can move at.
Now traditionally, Tribes has been very much about open terrain. It's rolling hills, not much on it. Now, by giving people objects that they can orient themselves around, we're able to create the illusion of speed far better. When you have simply open terrain, you have nothing by which to gauge speed. Your inner ear is not telling you anything. There's no wind blowing through your hair, except Fraser. So, but here, when you have trees, when you have buildings that zoom by when you're flying, you're going to understand that playing a shooter at 100 miles an hour is going to be a very different experience than a shooter where you're running.
Nice flowers.
Yeah.
That was a horrible jump.
Wow.
So right now, in the development process, we're very much working out the physics model, because that's going to drive the AI for single player. It's going to drive the physics model there, and it's very important to get that down and to be able. When you have a game that is fun to play before there's actually anything else to do in it, that's when you know you have gameplay, and that's what GTA 3 had, and that's what Tribes Vengeance had. You are not that good.
I'm even trying to avoid the wall.
Can you show us another map?
I like the faster
Now
death.
those of you who are familiar with Tribes recognize the rolling green hills and the sunny skies, but obviously Irrational is not interested in duplicating. Irrational is a company that, well, Ken can certainly tell you more about, but it's a company that innovates, and you'll see something here that there's something very distinct and never before seen in Tribes.
Wow.
That looks great.
Oh, man.
That's phenomenal.
That looks great.
You can see the very early beginnings of vehicle bays and turrets.
Yeah, it's not a finished asset. We
Yeah.
we denote things that are not finished by
Including
a
them in
complete
here.
lack of solidity. So,
And of course, we always preface with the caveat that 35%, this is work in progress, anything is still liable to change, and probably will. The burned out city is fantastic, not just to look at, but tactically, having this many hiding places, and yet still having really fast ski routes through the city.
That's going to be insane.
The mappers are going to go nuts.
Yep.
And when you're playing 3 dimensions, it's very hard to then go back and play games that keep you glued to the ground. It's a sense of freedom you discover when you can fly from rooftop to rooftop in a game, and then you can't do that in anything else. That's tough to give up.
I'm always trying to jetpack another game, but it just never happens.
That's true, I do Quake all the time.
Why do
Do
I,
you?
why do I keep changing fire modes? I'm trying to jump.
What stadium at?
I don't have a stadium.
You don't?
No.
That looks like a really crazy
We
map.
actually, wow, left like the city limits. Like, you know, he was turned around a certain direction and it was just open from there.
Yeah.
That's,
That was a lot of work within. We did heavy modifications to the engine because Unreal Engine is really an indoor engine.
yeah.
That was one of the things that a lot of the gamers were concerned about.
So we're waiting. We did a lot of work before we did that.
I don't really like the indoor thing, especially when you're fighting over spawned weapons and things. You've got people that camp for weapons. It's just really hard. You know, I like to be outside. I like the open.
That was,
And it makes a very different. It makes a very different single-player experience too, because it makes it harder for us to some degree because it's not a corridor where you can set off triggers for everything and you know exactly what's going to happen. Give somebody a jetpack in an open space. It's a very different path to design single-player.
One thing that Tribes never had is these kind of hiding places where you could have a different kind of strat. We were almost going to be able to ambush people and things like that.
Yeah.
That's going to put a whole new twist on the game. It's going to be
Definitely.
really wild.
The first time I played on this map with somebody else in the map, we were playing for a while and it's just deathmatch sort of at the moment. And as I got down in health and decided now's the time for me to actually run away and get away from this battle because I'm losing badly, I started running around corners and hiding in the buildings and stuff, and the tension level really went up. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm just like capturing footage. I shouldn't be tense.
That's a good sign.
well, and it does, it gives you more, that map in particular gave just, I mean, watching it gave more of that urban combat feel.
And that's something that we've been talking about in Tribes for a long time.
You know, with Tribes, you know, it was geared towards smaller teams. With Tribes 2, it went to much bigger teams. With this, what are these map sizes and team sizes looking like they're going to come out to be?
Well, I think that Kinetic Poet, who is a multiplayer designer, has specifically said that they're focusing on gameplay from 2 to 32 people. So that doesn't mean 32-person teams, that means support for 2 people jumping on a server and having fun in some sort of game type or map, and something that supports something very large. But I think optimum team size is still 8 to 10 people. It's very hard to get 16 people organized and schedules. We're grown-ups, and it's that as much as we love summer vacation when we're college students, we don't get that, and we need to accommodate that.
I ran a team for a very long time in T1, and it, of course, as the game got older, it got harder to get 10 people to show. But it still is hard because you have kids, they get sick, things happen. To try to get 12 and 13 and 14 people to show up for a match is very hard.
Yeah.
It didn't work with the 16, and when they changed it to 14, it worked better. But at the same time, you know, we'd show up for matches to cast, and while we're short 2 or 3 people.
Well, one of the things that I'd like to cover is I'd like to have Ken talk about the story and a little more depth into how that's being put together, and to tell you a little bit more about Irrational, because the team in Canberra is developing, and you know, fantastic people, just really a pleasure to work with.
That's the Imperial logo.
That's beautiful.
You can sort of see what KP's idea of a good base and multiplayer looks like.
Very nice.
Sorry, I'm missing the plot somewhere.
Well, this is not the single player.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was going to ask. Because we seem to be talking a lot about a multiplayer game at the moment, but not about a single-player game.
What I'm going to do is, right after this demo and Ken talks,
yeah,
we're going to show you some more videos from the multiplayer, and then I'm going to show you a video of the original prototype that Irrational did.
Right.
And this was something that was never intended to really be for public show. It was proof of concept, proof of their ability, proof of their understanding of storytelling in a game. Not that we really needed that. But it turned out fantastic. We captured about a 12-minute video from the initial prototype, and you can readily see why we didn't have to think hard about who we wanted to go with.
With the storyline, actually, is the storyline going to be based actually on stories from the Tribes universe, or is it going to be new stories that are generated?
They're based in the Tribes universe. The Tribes universe fascinatingly enough, spans 12 games. Dynamics, when they started, Dynamics was the original developer of Tribes. And the guy who ran the company had this very coherent, it's on the side, had a very coherent vision for his games, and every game that Dynamics made just about fell into the same universe, same fictional universe. So we have stories that cover about 2,500 years of this universe, and a ton of different places. And then the fans picked it up because it was very continuous, it was very interesting, and they further expanded it. So we have this tremendous sci-fi universe backdrop. The single-player story here is going to be set 400 years prior to Tribes 1. So it's something never before touched in this timeline. It's something brand new. Well, I'll let Ken tell you more about it.
Do you increase speed in skiing when you hit that ice?
Not at the moment, but it's something we could do.
I've heard you say the word adult several times. Is there going to be some plan to move away from Tribe's traditional teen rating?
There is almost certainly going to be a mature rating on this product. I think that
we haven't actually targeted a rating. The decision was basically, let's just make the game, and whatever the rating happens to be is what happens to be. And if the story involves something that's mature, then it involves something that's mature, it doesn't.
Well, basically what I'm saying is I realize you're not targeting a specific rating, but you're not too worried about staying into a teen rating.
We're not in the least bit concerned about staying in a teen rating, and based on what I've seen so far, which is absolutely subject to change, it is much more a mature game. Which is not to say gratuitous jibs or blood spurting out of openings. We're talking about a mature story, and something that story-wise you might not want your kid to be exposed to.
Okay.
Can you elaborate at all? We absolutely will, and I think once you see the prototype, you'll understand quite clearly.
Basically build it around the story and go from there.
Yes. And for those of you that don't know, which maybe all of you, Ken is by profession a script writer and a story writer, so it's something that he is really good at. And if those of you played Thief and liked the story in that was Ken. Freedom Force, that was Ken. System Shock 2, Shodan.
Great. That's amazing. What kind of video card are you going to have to run for this?
You need a diesel powered? No.
Is it going to be pretty hard on the system? Or,
it shouldn't be. When you consider where we're at now, this is actually a pretty big system. But
yeah.
Well, we'll see, but yeah, it's going to be.
A GeForce 3 will run it. A GeForce 4 MX will run it.
Great.
A top-of-the-line card today will be great for.
I think that's one of the big things that happened when Tribes 2 came out, is so many people that wanted to play it couldn't, and couldn't afford to upgrade to get into it, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is people can't always afford to buy a $600, $500 video card.
Absolutely.
There's going to be a fair amount of scalability options. It's the Unreal Engine. I mean, we've added a bunch of stuff, like there's normal mapping in it now, which is, if people don't know what normal mapping is, it's basically a way to use textures to make things appear like they have more polygons than they do, because you get the shadow, you paint in the shadow information essentially.
I want to play. Move over.
I got to tell you guys that the machine that this is running on was set up by Intel and has experimental and video cards. So, well, not experimental anymore; they're production, the latest. So we're very much working very closely with all the companies that matter to make sure that there's no issues with compatibility, that everything goes smoothly. We've learned a lot of lessons from Tribes 2.
I'm sure you guys did.
More than actually we really ever wanted to learn.
You know, one thing though that happened with Tribes 1 that's something that I think a lot of the old school players, I mean, it came around in a part of our life. We can't always dedicate the kind of time that we do in a game, and for some reason when Tribes 1 came around, there was some of us that were able to put the time in, and there was that learning thing, and that was the people, and we can never gain that back. I mean, that was something that was phenomenal in itself, but it can happen again with different people.
Well, I really don't envy Irrational's task of having to create a game that appeals to people who consider themselves 5-year veterans or 6-year veterans by the time it comes out, and yet is completely accessible and interesting to people who are brand new to the series. Yeah.
Well, we had to do that once before. We did a game called System Shock 2, which there was a small but extremely hardcore dedicated fan base for the first game. And
so
you're kind of,
I think this is a good point to have Ken take over and tell us about Irrational, tell us about the story and everything else.
and you know, what Alex was leading into is clearly with Tribes, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody in this room, there's a hardcore dedicated fan base for Tribes. And whenever you're dealing with a hardcore dedicated fan base, one thing they really don't want to think about to some degree is change. They like what they have, and it's hard. Change is a very hard thing to take. So the challenge with Tribes is clearly there's something that works there. Otherwise there wouldn't be, you know, what, 200 people down in that room, you know, flying in to play this thing. So we're not idiots. We're not going to say, oh, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. We're going to do it completely differently. One of the core reasons we brought on one of the core members from the community, Michael Johnson, is because we wanted to have a community, besides events like this to bring people in. We knew it was important because these people have been playing, these games people have, no offense, devoted a lot of their lives to this product.
It's sad but true.
You know, sad but true, but you know, they're hardcore fanatics, and leveraging that, we would fail unless we leveraged that. That's thing number one. Myself, I hadn't played a lot of Tribes coming in, and we hadn't done a really multiplayer-oriented game. So there was an education process, there was a combination of education and a hiring process to bring the people in. And I think the reason Sierra came to us is said, look, we have this huge knowledge base. We're very in touch with our fans. We're very in touch with this product. We want to bring other people into this product besides the incredibly hardcore community. We assume we're going to get them, and we're not. We do not want to offend them. We want to involve them and support them. But we also want to expand the audience for this thing. You know, if people hear my experience in playing Tribes 1 and 2, which I played both, was getting it after it had already been around for a while, going online and, you know, getting fricasseed. It was pathetic. I just got my ass kicked. And so they had this idea, which I thought was a good one, which was, how do you introduce people to the gameplay? Now, other games have tried this, like Battlefield 42. There's a single player mode, but it's not something that's particularly fulfilling. It is a good training thing, especially for old fucks like myself who, like, you know, need to spend a little time catching up. You know, so I played a bunch of single player Battlefield. But they wanted, you know, they had this rich sort of universe to explore, which can be a good thing and a bad thing, which I'll talk about in a minute. And they had this relatively complex gameplay that they wanted to be able to train people in. So we started talking about it. I think one of the reasons we got the job, and they were talking to a bunch of people, was I think there's a lot of problems with storytelling in video games, particularly. I think there's a lot of us who make video games are fanboys, really, at heart, and we get very caught up with proper nouns, and we get very caught up with little tiny niggling details of little universes that we've been working on since we were in, you know, the 5th grade, and that nobody gives a shit about. And, you know, that's why anytime I see an opening cutscene of a movie where it's like, it was the 4th Nagarian era, and Lord Dingodot had, you know, I just fall asleep. And I think most people do, because people, like, you know, if you think about a movie like Star Wars, it's introduced to a very simple thing. There's a farm boy who wants to leave home. And they take you with that very simple starting place into, you know, they've clearly gone too far in the other direction now, but the reason the original storyline was so compelling, it was very, very easy to describe. You know, you think about Lord of the Rings. It's, you know, it's another farm boy, but it's another guy, but it's a very relatable character with a very, very simple problem. That he's got this thing that he's both attracted to and repelled by that he has to destroy. And you start with a very simple thing. One thing we want to do with Tribes is not dump a giant data dump of the 600 pages of Tribes universe storyline on people, but just start with a very simple storyline, but that was also engaging and was epic in scope.
Dan, if I could interrupt you just for a second, I strenuously object to we got the job. We fell in love.
Okay, we fell in love. I'll try not to get too graphic on that point. I had also been very influenced by a book I read by Neil Stephenson called Cryptonomicon. I don't know if anybody here had read that book, where he basically tells, and Pulp Fiction is another good example, where he tells, instead of just telling a story chronologically, they tell a story jumping through different periods of time with different characters, and the story is told in a fashion as it's meant to be told, but the camera's not stuck like in most first-person shooters. Medal of Honor. You have a guy, and you sort of you snail crawl with him through every single moment, beginning, middle, and end, and you're stuck sort of on that path very tightly. We want it to be a lot freer with Tribes. Tribes is...
At this point in the presentation, Ken Levine from Irrational Games begins speaking about specifics on the storyline, and also they show a presentation of the original prototype delivered to Sierra by Irrational to prove that they were worthy of making this game. All of this material is private, internal at this point. They have requested that we leave this material out of the video, and therefore you will not hear anything specific about the storyline, nor will you be receiving any video or audio from the original prototype presentation.
And when we saw that, we said, yeah, I think that the company that makes the best single-player games is well suited to make our single-player game. And what, I don't know if Ken mentioned it, but they hired Kinetic Poet, who was a longtime community member, a very active player, competitive player, mod designer. He made Team Rabbit 2 for Tribes 2 in our re-release, and is now the multiplayer designer at Irrational for Tribes Vengeance. So these guys lined up every single duck. People that made System Shock 2 and Thief, Kinetic Poet doing multiplayer, Unreal Engine, and the Tribes universe and multiplayer goodness. And you got a game that has every making of something that will take the biggest gorilla off the block. So that's the demo, and please make your way to the bathroom. There's a tub full of beer that really, really is begging to be drunk. And Chris will continue.
For people who just got here, Chris is going to continue kind of looping through, showing some of the multiplayer.
Yeah, these are some, this is the current build now, and this is where we are. But if you guys wanted to know what the hell was going on we have a video in the other room. So if you want to see that, why don't you come with me?
Hang on.
Can you hang on for a second? We of UVA land.
For everybody who doesn't know, just if I can,
We have a gift for Sierra and for Ken as well. I didn't know the press was going around. Robert, one for you too.
Thanks. We have put together a really nice present. You remember the Tribes 2 boxes that we got that were the signed edition. Well, we're returning them in kind at this point. This is the Tribes 2 bestseller edition of Tribes that we picked up at Best Buy for $9.99.
Oh, that is sad.
They have been signed by the UVA land staff, and we'd like you to have them.
For the rest of Cheater. For those of you guys that don't know, Tribal War is the Tribes community fan site. It gets about 300,000 people visiting it a month. And it really covers a lot more things than Tribes, but it is a site that...
When do they talk about Tribes on Tribal War? That's what I want to know.
I mean, every bit of news that you ever wanted to know about Tribes is available on
And if you want to just keep up with the news.
Or the drama.
Or just the news in general.
CNN from us.
So having their support for the product, it really means a lot to us as well. Thanks, Cheater.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Everything, including
They wouldn't let me buy 4. I had to go through line twice.